What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to this week's installment on The Lake Show, and I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day again. I apologize to all of you about the late post. I didn't have time, unfortunately, this week to record until Tuesday afternoon. I was off Monday. That's typically when I record my episodes, but the national championship game is obviously held on Monday nights. Why that's the case in college football, nobody knows, but it is what it is. So I had a chance to watch the game, and it was a fantastic game. It was absolute cinema. But again, I didn't have the proper amount of time and preparation that I would like to have this week, so I apologize for this dropping in the evening on Tuesday. And also on my second channel, Renewed Hearts, I had to postpone that episode because I didn't hit on certain key messages that I want to portray to everybody and to my audience. I missed on a lot of key points that I wanted to, so unfortunately I had to push that back a week. But so that episode on my second channel will be dropping this Friday at 9 a.m. like it was 2 weeks ago, and next week we'll be back on track on The Lake Show and with Renewed Hearts, both on Tuesday mornings at 9 a.m. and Friday mornings at 9 a.m. respectively for both channels. And as you all know, I'm a Bucked Up ambassador, so use promo code SHOW32, get yourself 20% off any and all pre-workout orders at buckedup.com. And as you can all tell, different setup. Well, I'm borrowing my brother's room because the coffee shop I like to go record in, well, you know, there's a finite amount of space in there, and they have certain rooms, but sometimes, you know, it's available to the public. So sometimes the public will take it when I try to get it. So today I decided not to take that chance. I mean, I could have gotten a coffee, it sounds so good right now because I need some caffeine a little bit to wake me up. But today I'm using my brother's room, and I'm in the works of creating my own podcast studio. So soon you'll see wall panels, you'll see my logo, you'll see everything. I'll have the works, this entire setup. So I'm very excited to announce that in the coming weeks. It's actually going to look like a podcast studio and not someone with just a maroon background in the background. So that's what we got planned going forward. Again, I apologize for the late postage of this video. I apologize for being late, and I thank you again for all being patient with me and just making me a part of your day. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to talk about the college football playoff, the conclusion, and it was absolute cinema. And we're also going to be talking about the NFL playoffs and some controversy surrounding those, but we will be talking about the divisional round games a little bit, and then I will give my preview at the end of the episode. I will give you my preview of my thoughts and opinions on the conference championship. So without hesitating, let's get started right off with the college football playoff national championship game. Number 8 seeded Ohio State facing the 7th seeded Notre Dame Fighting Irish, and Ohio State has claimed their national championship in the inaugural 12-team playoff 34-23. Now, early on in this game, the very first drive of the game, Notre Dame received the ball. They proceeded to go on an 18-play drive, eating up nearly 10 minutes of the first quarter, and they took an early 7-0 lead on Ohio State. And that was, I believe, the first time that Ohio State in these playoffs actually trailed, which, as an average fan, not an average fan, but as, you know, just a college football fan in general, and how much I've watched Ohio State over this past year and Notre Dame, I'll be honest, I've watched more college football this year than I ever have, but that's what I like doing. It's a fun time to dive into all these games and all these teams. Notre Dame, I honestly thought that they had the defense to keep Ohio State in check and not necessarily the firepower on offense to keep up with the Buckeyes. I said it weeks ago, and I said it last week, that I thought Texas was the best shot to beat Ohio State. And realistically, they were, and it looked like they were until Notre Dame clawed their way back later in this game. But I said it last week that Texas choked it away and possibly could have beat Ohio State, which is true, but you got to hand it to the Buckeyes. They've been doubted, they've been smack-talked, and guess what? Notoriously, I've been an Ohio State hater. I do have a soft spot for the Buckeyes just because A lot of the players were baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit for the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, which he is the Savior of all of us. So I have a newfound soft spot for Ohio State just because of that. But I have been notoriously the biggest Ohio State hater over the past, give or take, 10 years since Ohio State won the first ever 4-team college football playoff. Everything came full circle. They won the inaugural 4-team playoff back in 2014, beating the Oregon Ducks by convincing fashion, and now they won the first ever 12-team playoff, beating one of the most notorious programs of all time in Notre Dame. You know, what a full circle moment for Ohio State. It's been, 10 years since their last national championship game. Not last game, but their last national title victory. I think of all the Ohio State players that have come and gone since then. Justin Fields, C.J. Stroud, Marvin Harrison Jr., Garrett Wilson, J.K. Dobbins. Like, the list goes on and on of how much talent has went through Ohio State these past 10 years, and they did not capture a national title. And you're not going to hear much hate from me when it comes to Ohio State because I watched this game. Even though Notre Dame took an early lead, this was just an outstanding game by Will Howard, Quinshon Judkins, and of course, Jeremiah Smith, who is probably, at this point, I feel comfortable saying that Jeremiah Smith is more than likely going to be the best wide receiver to ever come out of Ohio State, and that is saying something. And right now, I would take the stance that Jeremiah Smith is better than Marvin Harrison Jr., and Jeremiah Smith is only a freshman. The biggest thing you should never do now, and it's official after last night, is play Jeremiah Smith man-to-man. It does not work unless you have a Travis Hunter or if you have a Will Johnson from Michigan. You are not locking down Jeremiah Smith one-on-one. Now, the only reason he didn't do much against Texas is because Texas was bracketing him the whole entire time, and Texas's defense is actually stout. But Notre Dame's defense, for the most part, early on in the game, they couldn't keep up with Ohio State. And I didn't even think Notre Dame's offense could keep up with the Buckeyes in general. I mean, this was a 21-7 game heading into halftime. But if you look at the way Notre Dame fought back, that was impressive. That was really impressive. And head coach Marcus Freeman deserves a lot of credit for, not waving the white flag, and he kept his team in it through this entire game. Even when it looked dim, he pulled them out of the mud, and he dang near pulled it off. He dang near pulled off a comeback. And all Notre Dame needed was a third down stop. And I'm about to play you the exact reason why you can't play Jeremiah Smith man-to-man.
They're moving. Here they come.
Heavy pressure. Howard delivers downfield. And Smith, he's got it! Jeremiah Smith hadn't had a touch in the second half until that.
Like, he's just unreal. That was the play of the day. Notre Dame got their touchdown and 2-point conversion to make it an 8-point game. And then you had Ohio State 3rd and long. Everybody and their mother honestly knew where the ball was going. With that distance to a first down, they weren't running the ball because Notre Dame's offense was picking up steam. They were getting hot at the right time, and rightfully so. They needed to get this first down. That was imperative for Ohio State. And I will give Will Howard all the credit in the world for standing in that pocket, even when the rush was bearing down on him. Jeremiah Smith is just a freak of nature. He's unreal. Jeremiah Smith is by far the best wide receiver in college football and will be years to come, and more than likely probably would be a first overall pick in the NFL draft. Now, where does this leave Ohio State's Ryan Day? Well, I owe Ryan Day an apology because I was calling for his head after they lost to Michigan. But I did say 2 weeks ago that at the beginning of the playoff that I said that Ohio State, The best thing that happened to them was losing to Michigan, an inferior Michigan team that had no business being on the field with this Buckeye team. Well, they lost 13-10. And what did Ohio State proceed to do after that? Blowout win, close game win, and final minutes win in the college football playoff. Boat raced Tennessee, boat raced Oregon, held on against Texas, and now held on against a scrappy Notre Dame team that clawed their way back. Kudos to Ryan Day. I believe he is now 70-10 as a head coach, and now, finally, after so many years, a national champion. And Ohio State, tip of the cap to the Buckeyes. They did phenomenal. Now, what does this mean for Notre Dame going forward? Well, a lot of people wanted to compare the, at least I thought it was going to be earlier, but it was evident that it wasn't going to happen like the 2012 national title where Brian Kelly's Notre Dame team went up against Nick Saban's Roll Tide, and they got boat raced 42-14. I think Marcus Freeman is a fantastic coach. Same with Ryan Day. I think Notre Dame is on an upward trajectory. Think about what Notre Dame goes through. They haven't had a national championship since 1988. 1988. I wasn't even a thought then. That's 11 years before I was born. But looking going forward, Brian Kelly put them in a position where they were kind of good. They weren't necessarily the team that could, compete with all the SEC firepower that, plagued the early to late 2010s. But this Notre Dame team, Marcus Freeman, Notre Dame has the right head coach. Marcus Freeman, you can just see the passion in his coaching, the fight he instills in his players. Notre Dame's on an upward trajectory. They really are. It would not shock me whatsoever if within the next 5 to 7 years, Notre Dame is hoisting the college football playoff national championship trophy at the end of the year. But it wasn't meant to be this year. Kudos to the Ohio State Buckeyes. They captured the national championship in the first ever 12-team playoff, and now they look forward to going into next season. And that concludes the college football season and the first ever 12-team playoff iteration. Well, was it perfect? No. Did we get some classics? Yes. Did we get some blowouts? Yes. But we lived and we learned, and there's one thing I can take away from the college football playoff right now, that this sport needed it. This was so monumental for the sport in general, for college football going forward. Now, is it possible they'll add more teams? I think there was talks about expanding it eventually in the near future to 16 teams. I'm all for it. I'm all for change in college football. I love it. It's a fun sport. It's the best sport on planet Earth, right behind the NFL, right in front of the NFL. College football is better than NFL, and we'll see why. But shout out to Ohio State. This year for college football was probably the biggest it has ever been. Upsets, blowouts, the 12-team playoff, controversial teams that made it in and didn't get in. Well, and here's the funny thing. In the old format, in the 4-team playoff, Ohio State and Notre Dame wouldn't have even been in the college football playoff. And now look why that is such a good thing to expand it. Ohio State, anybody could watch their games and look at this team and realize they're the best team in college football, and it wasn't even close. All the SEC fanboys out there who wanted to cry and moan about not being in the playoff, any team that's not named Texas or Notre Dame would have gotten boat raced by this Ohio State team. Indiana wouldn't have fared any better against this Ohio State team in the playoff. Obviously, Tennessee didn't. Obviously, Oregon didn't. Arizona State wouldn't have. Boise State wouldn't have. I don't even think Penn State, after the way they played, would have held up against this Ohio State team. Kudos to Notre Dame and Texas for giving them a fight, but Ohio State, on the back of Will Howard, Jeremiah Smith, Quinshon Judkins, and an amazing defense, and led by head coach Ryan Day, captured the first ever 12-team college football playoff national championship. And now we're going to transition into the NFL. Well, let's go over the divisional round games. First off, let's start with probably the biggest upset. In the NFC, we had the first-seeded Lions taking on the 6th-seeded Commanders. and the Commanders won 45-31. Jared Goff didn't necessarily have the greatest game, but I think this says more about what Jayden Daniels is as a quarterback. Jayden Daniels probably is realistically on pace to be the best rookie quarterback probably we've ever seen. At least not from a statistical standpoint, but from a accomplishment standpoint. Think about it. Last year, the Washington Commanders were under the helm of Dan Snyder, probably one of the worst owners in professional sports history. They had no sense of direction, no head coach that was worth note. They had some skill position players. They had an okay roster. They had terrible coaching and terrible coordinators and a terrible ownership group. But this just goes to show how important it is to get the quarterback right. Once you get the quarterback right, everything will fall into place. Now, coaching plays a big part in that, but I'm willing to bet that Chicago is shaking their heads and rolling their eyes over this fact that they could have had Jayden Daniels. And in my opinion, Chicago has a better roster than the Commanders. From a talent perspective, at least, the defense is loaded with talent. The offense has so much talent. There's no reason the Commanders should be in this position, but they are. And that's really due to the fact of Jayden Daniels. Lamar Jackson 2.0. I think this is Lamar Jackson 2.0 we are witnessing. He's phenomenal, and the Commanders upset Detroit 45-31. And going forward, Detroit is probably going to step back because Ben Johnson has already accepted the head coaching position at the Chicago Bears. And then the defensive coordinator for Detroit, his name is escaping me, Glenn. I'm pretty sure that's his last name. But either way, he will be on his way out the door. So I think Detroit, even though they had a dream season, 15-2 regular season, number one seed in the NFC, surefire favorites to probably make the Super Bowl. Again, they had probably upwards of 18 players end up on IR, and a lot of those players were star players. But after a dream season, Jayden Daniels puts that to bed. Commanders move on to the NFC Championship game after beating the Lions 45-31. All right, now let's go to the other NFC matchup. We got the Philadelphia Eagles going against the Los Angeles Rams. Philadelphia wins 28-22 and punch their ticket to the NFC Championship. So, let's talk about the Eagles. Now, first of all, I would like the Rams, they're a good team. They have a really good team and a young defense that is only going to get better. I think about rookies Jared Verse and safety Cameron Kinchens. That defense is young with a lot of talent and a lot of upside. I think the Rams are going to be legit over the next couple years. They really are. Now, it all depends on Stafford's health, Cooper Kupp's health, the offensive line. It depends on the skill position player's health. But the Rams were in this game. It looked like Philly was going to run away with it with like 4 minutes left in the game, but, the Rams clawed their way back in this. But I think the biggest story of the day is Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley. I told everybody at the beginning of the year, even to last year, I told everybody that Saquon Barkley on the Eagles, even on a competent team with a decent offensive line, would probably rush for 2,000 yards. And sure enough, Saquon Barkley ran for 2,000 yards. And in this playoff game against the Rams, Jalen Hurts went 15-20, 128 yards passing, no touchdowns. Yeah, the story of the day was Saquon Barkley. 26 carries, 205 yards, and 2 touchdowns. The Eagles are literally riding Saquon Barkley through the playoffs. Now, that's not to say that the Eagles don't have talent in other places. Like I mentioned, they got Jalen Hurts, they got A.J. Brown, they got Devontae Smith, they got Dallas Goedert, they got a great offensive line, they got a stout defense. And Jalen Carter on that defense, I'm just going to say he might be on a trajectory to be the next Aaron Donald. He is a menace on the interior D-line. But still, through the playoffs so far up to this point, and even throughout the entire season, the loud, obnoxious city of Philadelphia, loud fans, loud quarterback and coach controversy, overall loud organization at times. That's the quiet, humble Saquon Barkley just putting his head down, who has become the alpha dog and leader of this team. And he put Philly on his back throughout this entire season, even into the playoffs right now. Saquon Barkley rushing for 200 yards against the Rams defense, and that's a solid Rams defense. I got to give it up to Saquon Barkley. He might be, at least in my lifetime, he might be the most talented running back I personally have ever witnessed. I witnessed prime Adrian Peterson. I witnessed prime Chris Johnson. I witnessed prime LaDainian Tomlinson. Barkley might be better than all of them. Not from a statistical standpoint yet, but from a talent perspective, I can't speak on the running backs of old like the Walter Paytons, Barry Sanders, and Emmitt Smiths of the world, along with Edgerrin James and Eric Dickerson. I can't speak on those guys because I know they're Hall of Famers and legit, probably some of the greatest running backs to ever step foot on the planet. But I would be willing to make an argument that from a talent perspective alone, Saquon Barkley is that guy. He might be, from a talent perspective, a top 10 running back all time in the NFL. And what thing to make the Giants even more sick? They paid Daniel Jones a contract extension over Saquon Barkley. Now again, Saquon dealt with injuries, terrible offensive line, a carousel at head coach and offensive coordinator. Now he goes to an organization. While many people are not sold on Nick Sirianni, or Jalen Hurts for that matter, they're in prime position to win the Super Bowl. Philly, year in and year out, is looked at as one of the top dogs in the NFL. And right now, they're going to ride that Saquon Barkley wave probably into the Super Bowl. But we will talk about the conference championships after I go over the AFC. So the Eagles beat the Rams 28-22, despite a late, heroic almost comeback by Matthew Stafford, who's still a top 10 quarterback in this league. If you say otherwise, you're crazy. You don't know football. But on the back of Saquon Barkley's 200 rushing yards, the Eagles advance to the NFC Title Game. All right, now let's transition to the AFC, the Kansas City Chiefs against the Houston Texans. The Chiefs advance to their 7th straight AFC Championship game after beating Houston 23-14. Okay. Now, if the Texans were completely healthy, I would have given them a better chance to even win this game, and they still had a chance in this game to win it. Here's what I really want to talk about. Now, I know people love to fleece the rules. If you're like anybody who understands rules, people always try to work around them, find a little gray area, a little loophole. It's what Ohio State and Oregon did the first time around. That's what Oregon exploited when the 12 men on the field penalty came in. But the roughing the passer debacle, there's 2 plays in this game. One by Will Anderson. I believe the other one was by Danielle Hunter. But either way, Mahomes is a runner. When a quarterback decides to take off and run, and he's a runner at that point, so he should be treated and hit like a running back or a wide receiver with the football in his hand trying to make a football move. The garbage that comes from Patrick Mahomes dancing around and then at last second trying to slide, and then that drew a flag, that's the most asinine call you can make on the football field. You really want to tell me the refs don't want Kansas City to try and make a three-peat? Give me a break. But just looking at how much wrong went in this game, now obviously Houston, they're down firepower on their offense. They didn't have Stephon Diggs. They didn't have their other receivers or their tight end Brevin Jordan. This Texans team is on the rise. They will be. But I don't think, and here's where I'll tip my cap to Kansas City a little bit. They lost 2 games in the regular season, 1 to Denver, 1 to Buffalo. Despite my issues with the targeting calls and the pass and the roughing the passer calls, despite how garbage they are. You can't deny Patrick Mahomes' greatness. You can't deny how good the Kansas City Chiefs scheming, play designing. Andy Reid is one of the best coaches to ever do it. So shout out to the Chiefs. They advanced to their 7th straight AFC championship. And now, one final game we're going to talk about. The Buffalo Bills against the Baltimore Ravens. Buffalo wins 27-25. This game was nothing short of cinematic. Came down to the last 2 minutes. And when Lamar Jackson was holding onto the ball real long, waiting, and then hitting his receiver in the end zone to bring it within 2, I'm watching Lamar Jackson, and I'm saying to myself at that point, he still looks like the MVP, despite an ugly interception early on in the game, despite an ugly fumble early on in the game, and despite another fumble from one of their wide receivers early on in the game. Lamar Jackson was easily the best football player on the field when it comes to the Ravens. Not overall. But the best player on the field that night was Lamar Jackson for the Ravens. And then, what do you need when a 2-point conversion is on the list that you need? Well, you go to your reliable tight end. But Mark Andrews picked the worst time of the year to have his worst game of his career. He had 2 big drops in this game, and he is the one who dropped the tying 2-point conversion. Would the Baltimore Ravens have won this game had he caught it? I don't know, and I don't think so, because Buffalo had plenty of time left to engineer a drive of their own for a game-winning field goal if Baltimore converted on the 2-point conversion. But the story of this game has to be just overall the Bills in general. Everybody, I was one of them. I'm guilty of doing this. Everyone wanted to write them off at the beginning of the year. Everybody wanted to write them off after Stephon Diggs skipped town, after Stephon Diggs went to the Texans. We are witnessing the best version of Buffalo, not overly dependent on Josh Allen to be Superman each and every week. A solid defense with a decent secondary and a good pass rush. It's not the pass rush you would necessarily want, but they can get to the quarterback in key situations. I think about Greg Rousseau, a big sack in this game. I think of Von Miller with the head on the swivel, returning and picking up that fumble by Lamar Jackson. You know, I think of Greg Rousseau, Von Miller, Ed Oliver. The Bills have a good front 7. Now, they don't produce as many sacks as you might think or want, but the defense still steps up when they need to. Now, again, this was more on Mark Andrews dropping the football, but I think we are witnessing the best version of the Buffalo Bills under Josh Allen and Sean McDermott. I think this is the best version of Buffalo. They're very well-rounded on offense, a decent offensive line. They can run the ball. With James Cook and Ray Davis, they can run the football. They don't have to rely on Josh Allen all the time. Rather than having a superstar diva wide receiver in Stephon Diggs, you got a bunch of other good quality receivers. Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, Amari Cooper, Dalton Kincaid at tight end, along with Dawson Knox at tight end. Like, we are witnessing the best overall version of Buffalo. Not overly dependent on Josh Allen to be Superman and dig them out of holes that they dug themselves into in past years. I think Buffalo wins this game 27-25, and they are on their way to the rematch that is long anticipated. Now, that's the divisional recap. Now, let's go into the conference championship games. I'm going to start with Buffalo and Kansas City. Number 1 seeded Chiefs against the number 2 seeded Bills. What do I think about this game? Well, right now, Kansas City is favored by 2. This is one of the toughest games I'm going to have to pick. If you look at the earlier matchup, obviously the Bills beat the Chiefs. As much as I want to say that fate will have it that Mahomes will get his 3rd ring, and I very well might be jinxing Buffalo, I think Buffalo is just overall so well-rounded that I think that they will go into Kansas City and finally get over the Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid hump in the playoffs. I think Buffalo will finally overcome Mahomes in the playoffs and make it to their first Super Bowl in forever, since the 90s. I'm going to take the Buffalo Bills to beat the Kansas City Chiefs 31-27 in an absolute classic. Now let's go into the NFC. Philly is favored by 6 against the 6th-seeded Commanders. When you look at the Eagles, they don't really rely too much on Jalen Hurts. When you look at Washington, if Jayden Daniels isn't on, this team ain't going to go. And while the Commanders had a great run, I think Jayden Daniels is already a top 10 quarterback in this league after what he's done this year. I think Jayden Daniels will be formidable for years to come, and I think Washington will regularly find themselves in the postseason playing to go to the Super Bowl. The Commanders put up 45 points against the Lions. Well, here's the thing. The Lions' defense has been so riddled with injury. The majority of those injuries on Detroit, who ended up on IR, were on defense. So even though they put up 45 points against the Lions, the number 1 seeded Lions, who did just well enough on the defense, you can look back and say that, Washington would have watched that game against Minnesota to clinch the year and clinch the number 1 overall seed. I think the Commanders just landed in a perfect spot. Their offensive, Cliff Kingsbury designed a scheme that would have worked very well against the Detroit Lions' brittle and depleted defensive roster. The Eagles' defense is a lot different. They are healthy, they are hungry, and they want get back from losing that final game against the Commanders in the regular season. I think Saquon Barkley is in for another huge game. I think he might run for a $180 plus. I'm going to take the Eagles to beat the Commanders. I think it'll be a decent game, but I think Philly would pull away in the end. I'm gonna take the Eagles to win 38-24. I think early on in the game, you'll see signs of life from Washington. You'll see signs of fight, but I overall just think the talent that the Eagles have on defense, on offense, the running of Saquon Barkley, the running ability of Jalen Hurts, along with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, and a decent offensive line and Dallas Goedert, that defense led by Jalen Carter and Darius Slay. I really think that the Eagles are going to beat the Commanders. So I have Buffalo beating Kansas City in the AFC Championship game, and I have the Eagles beating Washington in the NFC Championship game. I have Super Bowl 59 in New Orleans coming down to Buffalo and Philadelphia, and I think a lot of people would want to see it. And that's going to wrap it up this week on The Lake Show, everyone. I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day again, and I apologize once again for the delay. We will get back on track, normal, just next week. And I really appreciate all of you again for your support. We're only 2 subscribers away from 200. Keep liking, keep following, keep sharing with your friends. You're really helping out the channel. I'm your host, Dominic Lako. God bless.
I love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want, and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no, I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up! It's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror if he is no friend to me. It's not working out, maybe it's the chemistry. It's